will start our sessions and to introduce them formally, I'd like to ask our external relations and networking coordinator of NFC USA, and also at the same time, the national coordinator for our NFC handmaids. Please welcome our sister Maribel Bescolar.
Hello, good evening, brothers and sisters. It's so good to be here with you. And I'm enjoying my time with, of course, my dear sisters and the handmaids. What a privilege to be with you again. So, tonight, as I stand before you, I want to support our brother by saying that he was saying how much, this fire that burned in his heart when he first attended or listened to Father Boquet some years ago. Okay, so let me tell you my story too. I started, as some of you may know, the oldest in the community. I was appointed in 1996 to start the pro-life ministry. And that's such a privilege. I remember that Brother Frank was saying, Maribel, you'll just be an armchair leader of this ministry. And, because I was doing a lot of work then. And so that was going to be an additional ministry. But, it's really such a privilege and a blessing, and I can't tell you how much blessed I was personally. As I'm talking about myself, in just being trained by HLI. Then, in my first training with HLI was in 2006. In 2006 in Toronto at that time. So why am I saying this? Because some of you might say, it's the same thing over and over again. We understand abortion, so I don't have to listen over and over again. But I tell you, so how many years was that? Ages ago, but I've never seen such a great, depth. Now that I'm listening again to Father Boquet and Dr. Brian Truss, who's also been there for so many ages. So Father Boquet is celebrating his, in a few months, his 30th year as a priest. And this August, he's celebrating also, this is his anniversary month in HLI. Wow, Father. Yes. And, Father was also, is holding two graduate studies degrees, one in Masters of Divinity, and second, he's also just finished his masteral studies for bioethics. And you will know why bioethics is so important in this work for life as you listen to him later on. So I won't go much to that. He's also an honorary visiting, he was appointed, he was given an honorary visiting professorship by the Benedict XVI Catholic University in Peru. And as president of Human Life International, Father Boquet is a leading expert, of course, on the international pro-life and family movement. International because he has traveled and proclaimed the gospel of life in 90 countries and has done that many times over. Okay, so 90 countries, but many times over. Okay, so, and of course, he has rubbed elbows with people from the Vatican or archbishops of different countries and all leading clergies, and has influenced the pro-life movement. So, he has also been, some of you may not know, he's in EWTN, so you can look him up. And I'd like to encourage you too to sign up in hli.org, which you will see later on, because you can receive his weekly newsletter so that this will continue to help you learn about all the gospel of life in a deeper manner. Now, he was raised in the small town of Louisiana, where he, this is one story of Father Boquet that I just want to say. Would you believe that his father comes from a family of 18 siblings? 18. Yeah, and he fondly tells his story, shares his story that he probably, his priesthood was influenced from his maternal grandmother and all these members of his family. So that's how important our families are to this in proclaiming and building this culture of life. And so, okay, so now I'd like to introduce our second speaker for tonight. Dr. Brian Claus, who is the Director of Education and Research at the Human Life International. He was the first one I met before Father Boquet, because he's like one of the institutions there, right, Father of HLI. And he's a graduate of West Point. Yes, he was a former 18 leader for the Army Special Forces, and he holds a PhD in civil engineering and system science. Whoa. And since 1995, okay, so he was there already when I first got into HLI also. He has been HLI's Director of Research and Education, and is one of the most accomplished and respected intellectuals in the international pro-life movement. He has created actually such a rich resource that is being used now by the international pro-life movement. And I just want to say that we are so privileged in this community to have them walk along with us and nurture our growth in this very important work. And what they do is that they train local leaders in different countries, and they help families choose life, and they go beyond abortion. So you must understand that the gospel of life is not just about abortion as how people advertise it. So without further ado, I'd like to now call Father Boquet and Dr. Brian Claus to give us our formation for the night.
And I'm going to put this down. I think you probably can hear me without a microphone. If you can't, just let me know. So what we're going to do tonight, over the next couple of days, and I want to try to preface before I leap into this PowerPoint, actually is going to walk us through what you already are familiar with regard to the community. But I always think it's important, especially when we're spending time together, and after talking before, we're talking with Maribel and Yama, and of course the Surgeon General, making sure that we never lose the mindset of what our Surgeon General and what our leadership is trying to help within the community to advance. And that's very, very important, because even though we have a single mission, all of us, and that is the salvation of souls, to lead souls to Christ, including our very own, but there are many ways in which we serve that mission, and we're going to talk about that. And I think it's important to see how the overlap, and what makes the overlap become a reality is what Maribel just said. And that the gospel of life, which John Paul II, now St. John Paul II, said in his wonderful landmark encyclical, The Gospel of Life, in the very opening paragraphs, he said the gospel of life is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that's why they're not separate, quote, gospels. There's only one gospel, right? And so as we proclaim the gospel of life, we are proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ. The way, the truth, and the life. So it's important. The second thing I'd like us to remember is when speaking about life, we're speaking about life from its very beginning. We're going to talk about this quite a bit, over the next couple of days. But we're talking about life from its very beginning and fertilization. So the moment life begins to its natural end and everything in between. And that's what I want to put in the mind of each of us here. So that we're talking about, obviously, a very preeminent issue, the assault on life in the womb, okay? And we're talking about the other end of the assault, which is euthanasia, the whole, the assault on the elderly, the handicapped, the poor, on that end of the spectrum, and right? And then everything in between, like human trafficking, the issue of immigration. We could be talking about embryonic stem cell research, which is an immoral research program. We can talk about all that. So there's a lot of things in between, all right, that are all part of that gospel of life. So that's why what Maribel said is very important. That's why it's always something that's always moving, because sadly, this is nothing joyful to celebrate. The assault on human life because of evil and because of those who participate with evil, even in an attempt to try to create some good, there's always this assault that we're seeing on human life. And it's important to kind of be thinking about that. Oh, sure. No problem. I'll put that on top. Very good. Oh, that's nice, actually. Very good. All right, so that's what I want you. So that's what I want you to keep in mind, right? So that when you hear me speak about life, this is what I'm talking about, right? So any assault. So it's very important that we keep that in mind, because as in bioethics, and the reason why the whole bioethics discipline has come to be, it's not something new. It wasn't something that was just created. The issues of moral teachings and moral theology have been with us since the very beginning of the church, and even prior to the church with our Judeo-Christian root. But as the assaults on life have continued to escalate over, since the 60s and further, there has been a need for a discipline within the moral discipline of the church, the moral tradition, to address these issues specifically. And that is what I'm going to be doing with us over the next couple of days. And Brian close to do the same thing, taking things from a different angle, but making sure that they overlap. As I say that, if there's any question that you have, do not be afraid to ask. I know tomorrow we'll have a few more people coming in, but the idea here is that this is important, that we not just kind of dump information. Information is important, but the information is to make sure that it's something that's received. And if there's a question, pause, ask it. If it's something that we're going to cover later, we'll say that. All right? We'll come back to that after a while, but I want to hear your questions. Right? And that's very important. So that's kind of the foundation. Okay? All right. Now, this is all easy. So the first night is an easy night because I'm going to lay some groundwork using our Surgeon General's reflection. And we're going to start with the Gospel of Mark. I'm going to read the slide to you. You're familiar with this Gospel. All right? And so Jesus says, speaks about putting new wine into new skins. How does this parable of Jesus apply to the new situation of the world and the church today? This is what our Surgeon General is reflecting on, right? So what's the situation today? What is this new wine, all right? And he's quoting, of course, likewise, no one pours new wine into old wine skins. So because we're dealing with new situations, new assaults, new circumstances, and why? This is something that I know that you're going to have a nightmare on, right? This phrase, because we are dealing with the human person. You're going to hear this phrase throughout our days. Because we're dealing with the human person who is made in the image and likeness of God. Because we're dealing with the human person who is owed respect in every moment, in every situation, regardless of the circumstance, that this is why there's an opportunity now for this new wine. Because what? We're seeing an ever-increased assault on life, on the human person. Euthanasia is an example. I have an article that's going to come out on Monday. I just finished it right before coming here in my draft. It's now sent to my editor on what's going on in Belgium, what's happening in the United States, what's happening in other parts of the world regarding euthanasia, which mainly is assaulting human life in its terminal stage, in its end-of-life stage, in its elderly stage, and these are never accepted. And the sad thing is, Dr. Brian likes to say, it can't get any worse. It is and will, as long as there is room for people to move their agendas in its life. So this is a very important question. How do we deal with the circumstances today that we are confronting, and then how do we apply our moral tradition? How do we apply our teaching on moral and moral tradition to that situation. So moral is going to be very clear. The principles of the church never change. They're universal. They're applied today, tomorrow, and 1,000 years from now until our Lord returns. All right? They are always universal. So we're not, and you're going to hear a presentation on that in the sense that circumstances don't change the principle. All right? The situation doesn't change the principle. So let me give you a little something to laugh at as you start off. You can put lipstick on a pig. It remains a pig. Right? You can dress it in nice clothes. You can put earrings on it and anything else. It's still a pig. All right? The principles of the church are clear. They are universal, always applicable, and all moments. What's good about that is nothing arbitrary. And that's something that's very important for us. Right? So how do we deal with the circumstances of today? So let's look at our Surgeon General's comment. Quote, "The new wine is the fresh and ever-creative work of the Holy Spirit in moving the church to accomplish her mission." So this is what I want you to remember. John Paul II, I quoted a while ago, spoke about the gospel of life is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, how do we accomplish the mission? What is the mission of Jesus? The proclamation of the gospel. To proclaim the gospel to the ends of the earth. To go out and to baptize all nations in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. To bring the good news. So, our Surgeon General is asking this question. He says, this work is the work of new evangelization. The wineskin is the way our church goes about her mission. So he's using that word wineskin. This is how we do our work. So this is what makes it so beautiful, because we hear the scriptures say there are many gifts of the same Spirit. So it's a way to come at this mission from very different points of view. Not points of view in the sense of teaching. There's a single teaching, Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. But how do we come toward fulfilling that teaching? How do we bring that gospel to others? You, and through your own apostolic work through MFC, is one way. HLI approaches it in another way. There are many apostolic works. Look at the religious communities. We have many sitting here tonight. We have a representation around the world of different religious congregations, all with beautiful missions and apostolic works, all serving the mission of the church. Some are educators, some are teachers, some are in cloister and prayer. There's many, many ways. And as there are many communities, Franciscans, the Jesuit communities, and many others that are out there, they're in the hundreds. These are the ways. But our Surgeon General says it includes also how we think, our behavioral patterns, the practices we do, and the directions we move, and the directions we give. So, in a sense, again, so the wineskin is the way. So we can do that in the way of how we think. So in this room, the whole purpose of our days together is what John Paul called the culture of life. It's a framework. It's a mindset. It's how we think, which also affects our behavior. It affects the way that we direct others, how we direct ourselves, and we also recognize what's in a sense, what is moral and what is not able to be judged. So, for example, abortion is never, ever, ever morally right. It is always an assault on human life and never permissible. Ever. Can't do it. So it's important to understand that there are practices that are permissible, moral, and there are those which are evil and always evil and can never be chosen. We're going to talk about that. We call those intrinsic evils. We're going to spend time on that, okay? Now, so he asked the question, and this question you're going to see in multiple slides, right? What are the ways? So he's asking now, again, I just got a question for you. How many of you have seen this material for the first time? The camera's on me, so don't be afraid, all right? Don't worry about that. A few of you, all right? That's good. And I think this is going to be something that I'm going to continue to develop, and because it's important, I think, as we do this for the community and with the community partnership, it's just everyone needs a refresher. As a teacher, you come back after summer break, and what do you spend the first month doing? Going over everything that you did the last year. Why? Because we tend to forget. It's a chance to be refreshed. Great thing is a guitar always needs to be retuned. Right? So it's an instrument. So that's what we're doing. So our Surgeon General is saying, what are the ways now that make up the old wineskin that he says that cannot handle the new wine? So we don't pour new wine into old skins. So he's looking at that gospel and he's saying to us and to our reflection, what can we not continue? What's not working? Alright? And I'm going to spend some time with that again tomorrow in a lot more detail, but tonight laying the groundwork. So what does he say? There's actually 8 things, he says. 8. And he says the first is not seeing and giving evangelization a top priority it deserves. In other words, when John Paul II, and it actually goes before that, it goes back to John 23rd, to Pius XII, Pius X, the language of new evangelization is not something new. The church is always advancing the evangelization, evangelizing, proclaiming, going out. So he's saying that the problem is, it's not seen as a priority. We almost think it's like this little chair sitting way in the corner, not part of the Lord's group. It's out there, but it's not in the group. And what the Surgeon General is saying is that it has to be front and center, which is what John Paul said in Evangelium Dei. The gospel of life has to be in the heart of all of us. This is the mission of Jesus. And why is the mission of Jesus? Because Jesus came to serve human persons. Get ready for participation, by the way. Alright? So I'm giving you, and I want you to be purposely repetitive so that it sticks. Alright? Just like flying on flagging. Stick. Can't get off of that. Okay? But he says, for many, evangelization is just one of the many things the church does. Like, it's just one. But as the Surgeon General points out, and as the church teaches, it is not something that's on the periphery, meant to be on the periphery, it's meant to be in the heart. And repeating myself there. Just one of the very ministry of the parish. It should not be, again, on the periphery of our parish life, of our diocesan life. It should be in the heart, because we are missionaries. Okay? We're going to see that quote in a little while from Ginseng, or the quote from the Second Vatican Council. We are missionaries. We are always on mission. There's never, ever a moment when we're on vacation from mission. We're always on mission. That's a mindset. Okay? Let's go back. It's the way we think. It's our behavior. It's our practices. It's our direction. Very important that it's not something that's on the outskirts. It's in the heart. What does Jesus say? I've come that you might have a heart of flesh, not a heart of stone. It's written on the heart. This great command of love. Love God and love neighbor. So this is what we're doing. And he says, but evangelization is the raison d'etre. It is the heart. It is the reason for the church. And this is very important because we are a missionary church. The church is always on mission. Always. Because we're dealing with human persons who are called to salvation. I have come that you might have life, and that you might have it in its completeness, its abundance, in its richness, its entirety. Alright? So this is what it's about. She exists for mission. But just one of the many, evangelization can be easily neglected, or at the very least not given the time, energy, or attention it ought to have. And let's be very honest, this is probably the case, in so many of our situations. We have so many things that we're engaged in, family life, our daily responsibilities, our daily duties, going to work, providing for our families, caring for our loved ones. But all of those moments, my dear friends, are moments of evangelization. Every one of them. Because we're dealing with who? Human persons who are made in the image and likeness of God, who are deserving respect in all moments and all circumstances. Alright? Because we're dealing with human persons, we are always on mission. Alright? None of us lives in isolation. We're not meant to be isolated. We are a people called social beings. We are made for community because we're made in the image and likeness of God, who is one God in 3 persons of community. We're made in that image. So this is why we're always engaged in that mission, which is the mission of Jesus. What did he do? He went out. Did Jesus stay home? No. He was always a rôdeur, alright, in French. Always on the road. Always moving, alright? There was an urgency to Jesus' mission, which is our mission now. He is entrusted to us, which means we too must be urgent. There's always an urgency. Why? Because we're dealing with Human persons, made in the image and likeness of God, who are called to eternal life. We're dealing with immortal beings. Precious, irrepeatable, uniquely and wondrously made. But, the Surgeon General says, evangelization is the original death work of the church, but the church, and so he's just affirming, the church exists for mission, being just one of many. So again, I'm repeating what I did here, just so that we see it again. Alright? So he says, but. And so I want us to kind of think about that. Why is he emphasizing? And I'm going to come back to that tomorrow a little bit more. But is that something we believe? Okay, let's go back. Is it in our thought? So, for example, why did you come to me? And I know it's because our leader said we have to come, and that's good. That's okay. And here. But the idea here is within you is you know there's something more you want, something more you're looking for. Jesus says, seek and you shall find. Knock and the door shall be open, and ask and it shall be given. So we seek, we ask, we knock. So it influences our thought and influences our behavior. None of us came here fussing. If you did, it's time to go to confession. Because each of us knows that vulgarities are not proper to a Christian. That's why we call them vulgarities. They're vulgar. They're offensive. Because why? We're dealing with persons. Alright? Because we're made in the image and likeness of God. So we don't disrespect others by using foul language or telling naughty jokes or whatever dynamic. Why? Because it affects our behavior, our practices, and what we are directing. Remember, the idea here is, we are the light of the world. And what does Jesus say? You don't take that light and hide it under a bushel basket, tub. You place it where? On a stand for everybody to see. The very reason that you put it on a stand is you're directing people. So a lighthouse, on a shoreline, if it goes out, now of course the people have GPS, but those lights still make a radical difference in the shipping lanes and boating lanes. Alright? They warn people. Okay? Be careful. Alright? And they get an opportunity to direct them. Just like buoys do. Alright? Out in the ocean and out in the channels. Alright? You go on one wrong side of the buoy, you're in trouble. That's us. We're telling people that by the way we live. Alright? So, very important. We keep that in our mind. So, what are the negative consequences? He says, being just one of many, we can easily be neglected. Or it can at least become, it's not given the time, the energy, or attention. So, again, I'm just repeating that other slide before so that we see it broken down. It can easily be neglected. We can fail to give it the time it needs, and it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. Right? And I think we can be honest and say all of us are guilty. To some degree. We're all guilty. But that doesn't excuse us. We need to step up and we need to move forward. So what are those ways again? Number 2, not having that mindset of a rapid and massive evangelization with particular focus on the proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that doesn't mean that, for example, if you could be in the elevator, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you start talking about Jesus Christ when no one's brought it up. However, I can tell you a story in the Philippines. All right, I was what's that district that I say the last time? Makati. So I was in a hotel. The red district is behind me with all the naughty things going on. And so I'm in this hotel, and I get in the elevator with a gentleman who's not Filipino, who's visiting the Philippines with 2 women that are not his daughters or wife or children. Or in a relationship. They are prostitutes. Right? We get in the elevator and they're noticeably uncomfortable. Right? The good thing is God's got a great sense of humor. The power goes out there. Wherever this power comes on, all this is okay. Now we're in there for then probably eternity. And I said to your ladies, what are you doing? You know this is wrong. And I addressed him in that elevator. Alright? Now the poor guy didn't know what to do with himself. He could have punched me. But the Holy Spirit is fine. I mean, those 2 young ladies, I wasn't intending to make them uncomfortable, to disrespect them. They're human persons that need to be respected. It's because I respect them. I'm saying, this is wrong. And I said, why don't we do this? When the power comes back on, you get off the elevator with me. I had to be very careful how I said that. But God hears, because this is something that's, I mean, not everybody gets those elevator moments. So it's not that, it's just, my mindset is that every moment is an opportunity, right? And sometimes just by wearing this, I'm in the airport a week ago, waiting for a plane, which seems to be practice. They always waiting for a plane. It's delayed or canceled. And so what happened is, a woman comes over to me and she says, "Thank you for wearing flares. Thank you for being a priest." You know, so it's, yeah, just being dressed like this is a witness. For those of you who wear some of the t-shirts, some of the those are moments without them necessarily being verbal moments. But there are always opportunities to evangelize, to proclaim. And there are evangelistic programs and activities. But these are not done massively enough to be able to rapidly reach all the lost sheep. We're losing more people than we're gaining. Right? And this is not just a Catholic issue. We see this in our evangelical communities. We see it in many other Christian families. It's across the world. Why? Because we have a permissive culture out there. A secular culture that's pushing constantly. And it's very tempting. And we see it in our universities, we see it in our schools, we see it in our grade schools, middle schools, high schools. And so they're fighting. All right? And so we're up against this wave. So how do we go after the 99? Right? How do we go after that one lost sheep? How do we're losing more. We have to keep thinking of how to do this. Even in the community, you know your numbers. You know the community itself. You're trying. So it's here. It's not like it's out there somewhere in fairyland. It's right here already. It's in our parishes. Why do you think they're clustering parishes? Right? That's very sad. Closing schools. Very sad. Right? So what do? Again, the third, he calls it methodology. He says the methodology of Pentecost has been lost. We've lost the sense that we are a people that are animated by the Holy Spirit. That we are called together. And he says evangelization is a work of the Holy Spirit, done in the power of the Spirit with the tools and gifts the Spirit gives all of us. This was the way with the early church, the Surgeon General says. But it's become a fringe activity in the church, rather than a mainstream. So meaning, for example, we all know that there are gifts of the Holy Spirit and there are fruits of the Holy Spirit. All right? And Jesus says you judge it by its fruit. So if I'm living the animated life of the Holy Spirit, all right, then we will see that in the fruit that I bear. Now, there are 12 actually, but there are 9 specific ones. But the understanding is love, joy, peace, and then we move into others. Kindness, gentleness, all the beautiful fruits. And there are many others that come, the virtues that come along. But that doesn't just happen like this. It doesn't just say, come Holy Spirit, all of a sudden I'm going to, I ask for my location sometimes that I travel so much, but I'm afraid if I ask for it too much, I'm going to be traveling double with work. Right? But the idea is that the Spirit wants to animate. The Holy Spirit wants to animate our lives. But we have to open our lives. We have to receive that animation. We have to recognize that we are a people that are bearers and receivers. We're not the ones that determine. We're not the ones that decide. We are instruments. And don't give it a negative. Because God respects us as human persons. All right? God knows in whose image and likeness He has made. We don't have to tell God. God already knows. We have to remind ourselves. And I think that's what the Surgeon General was also. It's a reminder. So what else do we do? Number 4. The irreplaceable role of the laity. And I think he hits a very key point here. And it's one, as a pastor over the years, and in parish ministry, with my own eyes and see and saw. He says that not fully appreciate the laity, don't recognize their role. But not only that, we're going to see in a few moments, the church has always looked to and called for the lay empowerment. The awakening of the so-called sleeping giant that the Surgeon General talks about. And it's true. Cardinal Lorenzi, great cardinal of the church. I know Cardinal Lorenzi, and I've been with him many times in Rome. He's now in his 90s, a beautiful soul from Africa. And Cardinal Lorenzi would often say in these talks, he says, how many priests are there in the world? And then people would try to come up with numbers. How many bishops are there in the world? They try to come up with numbers always involved. 50,000 bishops, they do not. All right, you're well under 10,000. All right, small number. How many lay faithful people? So who do you think actually has the greater impact? You do. And again, it's not a comparison. It's not one or the other. It's a both and. Because Christ established all of it. All right? But the beautiful thing is our hierarchy have a role to play, and our lay faithful have a role to play. And there's a lot of overlap in those roles, and there's a lot of uniqueness in those roles. For example, for those of you who are nurses, doctors, teachers, it's not the bishop that's in those roles. You are. Right? For those of you who are mechanics, or plumbers, or whatever professions you may be, it's not the priest that's doing that. You are. Those are the moments where you are. You're at the water cooler. I mean, you're driving through McDonald's. You're the one that's in the grocery stores more than they are. And the idea here is to see that. That's what Cardinal said. Think of the impact that the lay faithful can have on the world, and do if we only realize who we are. And that's what we're talking about. Now, quoting here from Ephesians, I'll quote the quote from sacred text. And he gave some as apostles, others as prophets, others as evangelists, pastors, teachers, to what? Read that word. To equip who? The holy ones for the work of ministry. Whose ministry? All right, very good. Wake it up. Good. It's been a long day. All right, and some donuts back there. You need some sugar. Right? That's salty sugar. So, whose ministry? God's ministry. Jesus' ministry. He bestows that ministry upon us. He entrusts it to us. 5 coin, 3 coin, 1 coin. All right, here we are. And what? For doing what? Building up the body of who? Christ. Church. So for me to sit here and say, I'm better than you, all right? It's ridiculous. Our lay person to say that, our bishop to say that, or the pope to say that, would be completely in error, right? It's not a competition, all right? You know, we're all sprinting toward heaven. To understand that we're all moving in that direction in order to help each other to reach. And that's why he gives them many gifts. He gives them many charisms. And I think that's very important for us to remember. So this negative mindset gets in there. Many of those in the hierarchy, and I bet you've seen this, and this is the sadness. Many in the hierarchy see the laity as being involved, but mainly in doing services, lay ministry, parish work, social justice, and the laity see themselves as just instruments of service to the hierarchy in the church. Painter, plumber, cook, sewer, you name it. All that may be important to be doing. It's very important that we give of ourselves, but it's so deeper than that. And for any of the hierarchy to see our lay faithful as purely, quote, as just servants, is also erroneous. That is not. To see, as the Surgeon General points out, the call is for the fullness of ministry of Jesus. That a priest, prophet, and king with 3-fold gifts that we have received in the virtue of our baptism, to share in that great 3-fold ministry of Jesus Christ as priest, prophet, and king. Right? To be a prophet is to proclaim, to be a priest is to offer sacrifice, and to be a royalty to recognize that we are made of the royal diadem to be placed upon our heads. Right? We're made for this. Right? Paul's on Ephesians chapter 4, that we're made to be holy, we're made to be blameless in His sight, and we're meant to give Him glory, and we're meant to be with Him unto eternal life. This is what God has made. So, for example, your name? So Jennifer, if I get Jennifer out there, which I'm not going to do, but Jennifer Barney has a nice name tag. See it right here? Right here. It says made by God. You see it? So it doesn't say made in Singapore, it doesn't say made in Taiwan. It says made by God. Alright? Return to sender. Right? That's what Jennifer's made for. All of us. Because why? We're made in the image and likeness. And what does Jesus say? Really to God, who belongs to God. Jennifer does not belong to this world. She is in this world, but she is not of this world. I don't think we think this way. Which goes back to those slides. Think. Behavioral patterns, alright? Directions. How we're advancing, alright? Now, I pulled some things and I added to the Surgeon General's teaching. Just to broaden, just stretch it, alright? Which is important. Those are principles that he's given to us. I'm going to stretch it. And I'm going to give you some homework. Alright? Lumen Gentium, Second Vatican Council document called the Dogmatic Constitution of the Church in the Modern World. Alright? So, here, the one who promulgated in 1965 before is St. Paul VI. And here he outlines the role of the laity in the document. And I've even given you the chapter, and I've given you the numbers. You can go and read them. It's very important. What does the church teach? And so, Principia Fideliis Laity by John Paul II is a great, wonderful document on the Christian laity, on the role of the laity in the world. And most sadly, what's so important, and look, we all have to be, I love to read. I like to love books, right? And you don't have the luxury of sitting on an airplane. That's where I read. 17-hour flights, 14-hour flights, That's where I enjoy books. I'm not a TV person. So the idea here is that it's important for us to be knowledgeable. And we don't have to do it. I'm going to offer a little insight. To those of you who are in our household, in our chapter meetings, which I hope all of you are doing, I'm going to talk about that towards the end. I'm going to aim myself for about 10 after 8, and I'm going to kick it off Dr. Ryan, because we're supposed to end at 9, so we're going to keep that. We've got long days, and we'll pick it back up tomorrow. But just laying some groundwork is the understanding of, for example, like taking that document for the first 15 minutes that whenever you're having a study period. That's a great document to pull. You got to read all those numbers because they're long. You just pick one, and the next month come back and pick it up, or the next 2 weeks pick it back up, and just talk about it. Share. What does it say? Most people have never read it, right? And so we just started like a woodpecker. We just keep pecking at it. All right? And eventually what happens, you're going to say, I read that document. It might have taken me 2 years to read it, but I read it. All right? But it's there. You just have to keep going forward. So again, what does the Second Vatican Council say? The laity are, listen to what they say, our wonderful fathers of the church, that the laity are considered to be the full members of the church. You're not the laity are not a limb. All right? They're not just kind of a finger sitting on my hand. All right? So what does it say? Full member. Full. Very important. Completely called to partake in the church's mission of sanctification. So what does the Council of Fathers say about the laity? That you're a full member and that you are meant to fully participate in the mission of the church. So when a priest says it's your job, you can say, no, it's our work. Because he's part of the church too. All right? Or when laity say to me, oh, that's the priest's job. Wrong. It's ours. We might have different ways in which we serve it. All right? Okay? I don't go to a plumber to have open heart surgery. But maybe the plumber might do a far better job. I don't know. But the idea here is we go to the one for the gifts that are necessary. But we're all in this. Very important. And it says the laity are responsible. This is very important here. And we'll get into this tomorrow. Are responsible for their own actions and are not only, I'll put it in red, are not only considered to be agents of the hierarchy. In other words, you're not a slave. Right? You're not just a fringe. Understand that you have your own action. Part of the words you have a unique and wondrous role in the life of Christ. And to see that is so important. But because if we're not thinking that way, if we're not behaving that way, and if we're not speaking that way, and we're not directing that way, then what is? There's a different mindset. And I think that's what the Surgeon General was at. Some other mindset, some other old wine is stuck. Right? Right? You've got a clogged artery. Right? And we need to have a rotor come in. Go back to our nice cardiovascular surgery. Right? It needs to be open so that the new wine can flow. If not, the clot goes out. What happens? It don't last for long. Alright? So, again, I'm adding to the Surgeon General's reflection. Vocation laity. Through faith and baptism, the faithful have said yes to God's inviting call and have entered the house of the Lord as members of Christ's mystical body. Each member has personally been called by name. The name is so beautiful, right? And each of us have it. Some of you might have the same name, but there's only you. And when someone, for those of you married, don't you love being called that? Except when it's, that you done something wrong. But when it's something, that's very gentle and very loving, It's wonderful to hear your name, isn't it? You know, a child loves it too when you call them by name. Because there's something beautiful in that heart. And that's something we have forgotten. We didn't call our names. Call. What does the Lord say? For me, it's easy. I've counted every hair in your head. I can go work for God. Very easy. I make this job easy. Right? So, but the understanding, God has called us. And here I added Mark's gospel. Sent forth by Christ's command. Go out and proclaim the gospel to the whole of creation. That's what's so beautiful about this word. It's never ending. What's frightening about this word? It's never ending. There's never enough. And I think sometimes it's kind of overwhelming, especially when we look out in the world and we see that tidal wave, that tsunami coming at us. And it can be overwhelming. It can be downright scary sometimes. But we have a mission. We have purpose. We have been called by name. And that's what we have to put in that mindset. So what are those ways? Number 5. He says, go out and employ. This is now back to the servant journey. Into the peripheries. Go. You've been sent. Alright? Now think about that. The early apostles minus Judas the betrayer. Alright? What happens? They all go out. Some stay a little here. Alright? James stayed in Jerusalem. That's where he was the first one to be martyred. Alright? But when you look at others, Peter traveled to Rome, stayed in the holy city. Alright? And what happened? But most of them started moving out into the periphery. They never saw each other again. After those very, very early councils, when they came together to kind of discern about, with foods and so forth, and those general councils, before that point forward, even now, never saw each other again. It's amazing. Think about those religious that came to the United States decades, centuries ago now. Never did they see their family again, never heard from their family again, and their family never heard from them again. They died here, were buried here. Some of them lost the time. But they went out. What about us? Do we have that kind of charism? Are we willing to say, we all say, here I am, Lord, I want to go to heaven. And when the Lord says, I'd like you to go do this for me. Can you find someone else for that, please? We're all being sent. The church needs to go out to the people where they are. This is where Pope Francis, one of the statements that he's made about kind of smelling like the sheep. It's a unique way of him saying the same thing. Is that, if I'm going to sit in here, the people need to come to me. That's never been the mission of the church. And as we're going to talk at the end of this slide, I'm going to jump a few slides, but the understanding is that we're not in the age of Christendom. We're not in the age, we never have been, fully, where everybody around us are believers. And everybody else believes what we believe. Right? We might have little communities like that, we might have a little area like that, maybe, but that's not the 100%. So it's the idea here, we can't pretend it is. I can tell you in this country, people don't believe what I believe. They don't hold the values that I hold. And these are people that claim to be Christian. I'm sorry, they're not. We have a president who claims to be Catholic. He's not. Alright? We have a Speaker of the House who claims to be Catholic. She's not. And there are a litany of people underneath them. Right? If you love me, you keep the command. Okay? There's no love. And I'm not judging their heart. I can judge their fruits. I can judge their actions. And Jesus says, do that. Right? And we do. And I think it's important to understand that we're constantly being sent. Always. We are losing Catholics by the day. And they're being taken not just by the world, and they are, but they're being taken by cults. Think today, one of the largest percentage of people today is now called nuns. It's not like sisters, right? These are non-religious individuals who claim no association to any particular religion. They still consider themselves spiritual, which is a whole other thing to talk about. But they understand that that's a growing number. That's frightening. That's our future. I want you to understand where that's going to look. Now, let me give you another clear one here. In the Philippines, I've been there 14 times, all the way from home. Right? And so I remember in Lipa, the wonderful Marian feast of Our Lady Mediatrix, and I remember, then with Archbishop Arguelles, and sitting down with many of the archbishops and bishops all come to this wonderful feast. And I had a priest retreat for about 4 days prior to that. then I did a program with the bishops, and then we had the event. And I remember looking at all these thousands of people gathered. I mean, they left work, they didn't go to work that day, they took vacation days, whatever it was. And one of the archbishops emeritus came up to me and said, "Do you think this is a lot of people?" Oh, he says, "It's not." When I was the archbishop here, right, he says, tens and tens and tens of thousands. The governor would come, president came. This was an event that was, you couldn't keep. I mean, the city was overwhelmed. Jointly overwhelmed. Where are they? So when the bishop in the Philippines tells me, "Oh, that'll never happen here," too late, already there. The wolf is already there. Right? And the more we take our guard down, we lose. So what else is it? Number 6, servant leaders. There is a failure in servant leadership. So that, again, he's looking at that old line and that new line. That's what he's looking at. So the idea of a mindset that things are good way, or it's not that bad, or whatever happens, old wine, right? It's old wine skin. Right? And we have a new problem in front of us. And it says what the leader needs to be is an authentic servant. Tomorrow I will show you a couple of documents that I'm going to encourage you to read. That's going to talk about authentic servant leadership, what that means. And all of us are leaders here. Not just because someone's in a leadership position. Yes, but all of us are leaders. Why? Because we're all called into the mission. All of us lead in some kind of way. Why? Because we're doing what? We're directing. Right? We are leading others. And that one who is servant leader is there not to serve, to be served. I got to correct my spelling here. But to serve. To give one's life as a ransom for the many. So I'm not meant to be served, but I am meant to serve. So again, we're talking about a mindset, framework. Right? So all the husbands, do me a favor. Stand up. Just for a moment. All the husbands. Right. Now, what do you think? Now, are your wives here? Yeah. All right. My dear ladies. So, and gentlemen, this is going to be a litmus test for you, right? It's going to tell you what your wives are thinking. So, my dear ladies, does your husband on a daily basis, 24/7, every waking moment, from the moment he awakens to the moment that he goes to sleep, he is always thinking of your good?
Yes, ma'am.
Some are trying to think about it, right? So I want you to think though, because that's exactly the mindset. Is that we're not talking about pencil, we're not talking about Gucci bags and all wine dinners and all. That's not what we're talking about. Is to think about what is for her good. What is for her salvation? And that's what I'm serving. And I can serve her by other things. I can love her and care for her and give her nice, all beautiful things, but that's not the priority. And the other thing with parents and their children, and the wife does the same thing. This is the household that builds the saints. That's the kind of household that changes the world. And that's important. So this is what we're dealing with. Number 7. So the lack of preaching on holiness. So not only for the priest, but also the basic call of the Christian is to holiness. To be holy as God is holy. Not strive to be holy is more easily to fall back. Not strive to be holy is to more easily fall backward or even to fall away. In other words, if I'm not constantly thinking about growing in holiness, growing in virtue, then what am I thinking about? Right? If I'm not considering it to be a priority, then what am I doing? What's my mindset on? What's my framework on? What are my behaviors about? Right? Judge it by its fruit. So many ladies today still do not even read, study, or pray with sacred scripture. I added the word pray to the serving generous reflection. Right? Hold on. Tell the Pope below. I only will take a bishop position behold. So the call of the new evangelization is for holy warriors, says the serving generous. Goes back to what we had a couple of years ago, holy warriors. And what that means, obviously, is not the t-shirt. It's not the chain. It really means to be holy, to be a saintly person. And that doesn't mean walk around like this all day long. You know, it could be, but it's not. To be a holy person is to allow that animated gift of the Holy Spirit to be animated, to be alive in us. And I think you don't know that word animation enough. And that is, if you took a book, just all the way that cartoons were originally done, and the idea here, you put one image on one page, another image on another page, another image on another page, and then they flow, and all of a sudden you have animation. The character comes to life. That's us. And what animates us is grace, right? The life within us. Number 8, he says the gospel of the cross. Not preaching about and not embracing the cross. It's a problem. It's an old, skin. And you can't pour new wine into this mindset. Alright? The authentic and only gospel is the gospel of the cross. It certainly is not the prosperity gospel. In other words, he said, it's not what people will run for us. Did any of us wake up this morning and say, Lord, I can use a good dose of suffering today? Matter of fact, Lord, the suffering you gave me is not enough. How about some more? None of us got up and asked for that. And yet Jesus says, pick up the cross and follow. So whatever, quote, the cross is, and so that's what I pick up. And that's what the Lord offers to me that day, and that's what He wants for His glory and honor, and for my good, then I move forward. One hardly hears priests and pastors preaching about the cross, the embrace of which is the only way to authentic discipleship. Jesus says there's no way to the Father but through me. There's no way around it. And boy, the people try to navigate around it. My goodness gracious. They fight tirelessly to get around the cross, to get around what it is Christ wants to do. So, this is now where I'm going to start adding a little bit. And Brian, I'm going to end about 15 after, and then 45 minutes will be yours. We're just kind of splitting up the time frame here. So he says, we are, this is, again, the Surgeon General, and I'm going to show you that his mindset is on heart. Okay? And so what? Because he reminds us that, quote, with regard to evangelization and mission, the ways of our church today are no longer fully ways of the early church. Very, very important. Right? What's happened? Remember the Second Vatican Council? Talking about, looking at the signs and times. What's happened? Not that we take on the world values. No. Look at it. What's happening? You ask the Council Fathers in the 1960s, was abortion, that these murders happened? Yes, they were right. But they could not have envisioned in the full spectrum that we would see today. Just step back to the First Vatican Council. That would not have been in the mindset. Something has happened, all right? And the situation has become more challenging due to a number of developments in the world and in society that causes the call to the new evangelism. The reason why we need the new evangelization, John Paul II said Evangelium Vitae, is because we have to reteach people how to love, serve, respect, and defend life. They've lost the mindset. I mean, you go shopping. Everyone tells you hello at the grocery store. Anyone hold the door open for you? Anyone say thank you? No. Well, maybe some people do. But the majority doesn't notice you. They walk over you. They ignore you. Hit you with the buggy. You're in the way, it's just that's the mindset. It has to radically change. And so, he says, there are reasons. Let's look at them real quick. He says there's a rapid ascension of the internet and social media. You have to be honest. Alright? I did this the other night with our friends in Las Vegas. We went out to dinner. I think there were 14, 15 of us. And the majority are all playing on their phone. I said, stop. Phones off. Pick them up. Why? Because you're dealing with human persons. You're dealing with people of dignity. Am I not more important than a student social media? I am. Well, turn it off. And that's not arrogance. But we get so caught up in this. And I'm not talking about recording, you're doing recordings, that's fine, you take your slide. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about how many hours we spend on this crazy stuff. And then they say, oh, I don't have time to pray. Really? I don't have time to pray for sacred scripture. Really? How many hours you spend on the internet? I don't know. Well, let's find out. Your phone can tell me how long you've been on it. I was on that. Yes. How many hours and minutes you spent? Could you not spend 1 hour with me? So there is a rapid problem with that. And I would tell you in Africa where the internet is just a thing. It can be a tool for good, it can be a tool for bad. It's a tool. How we use it. In Africa, many of the bishops tell me that the moment the internet comes in, so does pornography and many other things, and it causes great harm to families. So they actually prefer it not to be in the community. As much as it opens a door for communication and connectivity, and it can, and it opens up a whole library of information, but unfortunately it's not necessarily what people are looking for. So another thing, the age of sexual licentiousness, including the advance of gender ideology. So today, as we're going to talk about tomorrow, is this permissive culture. Anything goes. If it gives me pleasure, must be good, I can do it. No, but that's what we're up against. The culture of death, John Paul coined this phrase, incessantly and relentlessly assaulting faith, family, and life. Absolutely. Rise of secular humanism, becoming pervasive in society throughout the world. Just the very fact we're rejecting God, we're rejecting natural law, we're rejecting truth, we're rejecting everything other than what is self-autonomy. I'm the center of the universe, what I believe is what I believe, my truth is my truth, who are you to judge me? This whole mindset is what's taking over. And he says, the more aggressive work of sects and cults, they're working tirelessly. And what's happening? You know, many times, I'm not saying you, me, our brothers and sisters are sitting on their lounge chairs, spending hours watching TV, and what are they doing to go out and proclaim the gospel? Our parish priests suffer this all the time. You know, that's funny. When I travel in the United States particularly, I hear parish priests tell me that what they do for Filipinos, there would be no one cooking, no one doing this, and there was acting. So that says something of the mindset of not just what's in the MFC, but how many of our Filipino brothers and sisters are still practicing their faith and living their faith. And they're involved in their parish ministry, which is beautiful. And the priests see it. And some of our Hispanic communities are doing the same thing. And so, I'm not sure if I know your heritage, but I mean, if you go to Carolyn, Goa, right, which is going to have down, most of the priests, if you have a priest or religious in the United States, out here, 9 out of 10 of them will go to Carolyn. Right? Very strong vocations there, and so very beautiful. But you see, the idea is that what is happening? We need to open our eyes. The growing apostasy, in other words, the rejection of the faith, which goes back to this gender issue, which is earlier, which is an assault on the dignity of the human person. The whole assault that we see today with the rejection of what is true, and then the entry into the church of the enemy with progressives and liberals and heterodox. Heterodox means multiple teaching. All right? So there's many ways. No. Jesus says, I am the way. Right? So that's important. So, 4 slides left, and then we're going to kick it over. I'm going to pick a lot of this up more and integrate it into, so I know I'm throwing a lot at you. The slides are going to make available to Barbara, and that you can go back and look at, both use within your work and also your studies. And all I would ask you, on this one, but the idea is it's good to review, but all we both would ask is that we just don't, just throw it out there. There's a lot of work we put into them, and we want to be able to use them and also explain them. So it's kind of out there. This is a book I'm going to recommend. Maribel knows about this book because I recommend it to many of the leaders within the NFC. So it's called From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. This is a quote from the back of the book, and on Amazon and Goodreads. This is kind of just an excerpt from it. And it just says, this essay is an attempt to contribute effective strategies to engage our own time and culture once more with the gospel of Jesus Christ and for a weary world. This is what our Surgeon General taught us. It's weary. Alright? So pour new wine into new skins to awaken the Catholic imaginative vision. So the Catholic Church is a vision, a mindset. And what Monsignor Boquet talks about in the book is that we're pretending that we're in the age of Christendom. We're all believers, we're all Christian, that all these Catholics, we're all believers. Wrong. Right? We need to be, as we should be, people who are in the apostolic mindset. We're missionaries. And even if we were fortunate to have St. Stephen of Hungary or St. Louis, King of France, so we did have ages where we have what we call those golden ages in the But we're not in it. We're far from it. So, we need apostles. We are in a new apostolic era, not an age of Christendom. We must engage this new era in a new way. New wine into new wine skins. Leaning on the eternal, unchanging, and yet ever new gospel of Jesus Christ. Alright? The beginning and the end. Alpha Omega. We don't need updated teachings, quote from St. Paul VI. We need apostles, authentic and passionate disciples. That's what we need. Right? So what will this new wineskin be like? Again, we're going to use the Surgeon General. Evangelization and mission must be primary and topmost in the mission of the church. Because it's the mission of the church, it's our mission. Why? Because we are members of the body of Christ. It's our mission. Right? Number 2, emphasis on the calls to discipleship, servant leadership, holiness, and the cross. So he's just repeating, these are the remedies, but this is the new wine. This is how we pour new wine into new skins. New mindset, new behavior, new discipline, new direction. Now, it doesn't mean we're throwing out the moral tradition. No, it's the moral tradition that guides us. Why? Because those principles are the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Right? They're universal, always applicable. Always. That's the mindset. Lay people taking on Christ's ministry as priest, prophet, and king. Taking our proper role. Taking our responsibility. A return to the methodologies of Pentecost. To think when St. Peter got up among the brothers and he preached. Right? You put Christ to death. But, and he goes on, thousands of people came around. And so, what a beautiful witness, alright? And I think that's something we need to be mindful of. Very mindful of. Right? So, the new Pentecost, pastoral formation. So, I'm stopping with this. I'm going to pick it back up tomorrow. Right? Because I want to get Dr. Brian his full 45 minutes there before our time. But this, I hope you've seen. If you haven't seen, then our brother Ed Donald will not be very happy. Alright? This is something that goes in the pastoral framework. Alright? So I took this actually from Ed's presentation, that he gave in Vegas. And it's the first time I've seen it in this fashion. And we can talk about this later, but the idea that who are we serving? Always the person. So think about how, our teaching activity, our Christian character, mindset, behavioral patterns, discipline, direction, alright? Think of how all that plays, alright? But he's using it in different ways. I'm going to use it also in different ways. Right? So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to let you know that Maribel talk about this. It's my Spring Life column, and you can always go to our website if you're interested. It's a weekly column. I've been writing now for almost 12 years. Goes out every week. And dealing with all these biological issues. This week is going to be on euthanasia. Okay? So I'll take this back up tomorrow. We're going to jump tomorrow into principles and spiritual battle, and we're going to continue. Okay? So I hope you come back. Right? Drag someone, bring someone with you. You know that kind of thing? Alright? So don't be afraid. John Paul's words. Okay? Alright. Little buttons. New buttons. Okay.
So I'll put on the microphone here. And I'll put this in my pocket. But first, a funny movie. I like this movie because this young mother with a little baby is hearing her baby laugh for the first time. Just had a thought of the impact, which she's been profoundly deaf up until now. This is a wonderful face on the young mom who's hearing her baby for the first time. Next is not irritating. Well, you couldn't hear most of it, but you get the idea. Now, hopefully I can find my presentation here and then do that. Where is the, okay, there we go. We define some terms. All right. This is very important, the terms of the debate, because truly, that if you don't have the right idea of what these various terms mean, you can't be effective in pro-life especially, because it can be very highly technical. And so I'm going to go over some of the very fundamental phrases that we talked about, that people have mistakes about, and don't really understand all that well. And thus, we can begin with a good foundation on what these words really mean. Because all of you know that the culture of death is very good about playing with words. They can make things seem like they're not. For example, this Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually going to cause inflation to go up. Or the $300 billion of all of this money given to people to help pay for their college education is going to make the country somehow a better place. Everything, especially when you have the conflict between the culture of death and the culture of life, you can expect that whatever the culture of death said is going to be a deception or a lie. So there's no need to take notes here. I can send the entire presentation to you. Just send me an email message at this email address here, bclows@hy.org. And I can send you the presentation itself or the notes. So let's take a look at what is a Catholic. A Christian is a person who's been baptized. Since baptism imprints a mark on the soul that can never be removed, this can never be changed. But as Father Boquet just said a few minutes ago, it is possible to be a Catholic and then fall away from the faith. If you don't follow what our Lord says, you're not really a Catholic anymore. Despite what Joe Biden, Fancy Nancy, and all these other people say, they're not devout Catholics. In fact, they're doing catastrophic harm not only to the faith, but to human life in general and the dignity of the human person by what they're doing. This is not in any way Catholic. So let's take a look at what would happen here if you have somebody who joined a basketball team. And then they decided, I don't want to wear a uniform anymore because it detracts from my individuality. Or I don't want to bounce the ball anymore. I want to just carry it back and forth. And I want you to take the net there, and I want you to lower the meter because I can't jump very well, and I want to be able to stuff the ball in the hoop. And I don't want to go to practices anymore because it impinges upon my free time. How long would it be before that coach would kick you off the team? Well, same thing in the Catholic Church. If you don't follow the precepts of the church and the teachings of the church, you're not really Catholic. So when these people say that I'm a good Catholic, but I disagree with the church's teachings on abortion or transgenderism, that's a lie. You can't be a good Catholic unless you believe in what the church teaches. And what I've learned over the years is that all of the church's teachings on sexual morality are always backed up and proven by science. And all of these teachings are coherent with each other. And most of all, if you follow the church's teachings regarding sexual morality especially, you'll be a much happier person. This is a result of the United States General Social Survey, which has been going on for 60 years now. Every year, professionals go out and they interview thousands of couples. They're married, they might be homosexual couples, they might be just shacking up together, and they ask them many questions over an 8-hour period. And they use this to track the trends. And we found, and this the social survey has found, that there are 3 things that can almost guarantee that you're going to be happy. That you are religious, that you're married, and you come from an intact family. This is sociology. It's not what I'm saying or what the church says. It is a good example of how the church's teachings on family and sexuality are always backed up by science. Now, what is the culture of life? We use that term a lot. Pope St. John Paul II used it the first time in 1993 in the United States. It means respect for nature and protection of God's work of creation. In a special way, it means respect for human life from the first moment of conception until its natural end. Why do we respect human life? Because we are human persons, made in the image and likeness of God. Doesn't matter what your sex is, how tall you are, how old you are, the color of your skin, we are made in the spiritual image and imprint of God. And so we are all deserving of this respect. The first and fundamental step in the cultural transformation consists in forming consciousness with regard to the incomparable and inviolable worth of every human life. And this is what we have to instruct people on. So we start with the very fundamentals here, and we go from there. We must respect every other human being. So there can be no room for things like human trafficking, abortion, racism, or all the rest of it. As our Lord said, as Father said, the great commandment is you love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your being, Mark 12:30, and you will love your neighbor as yourself. That is the whole of the law. Looking at the situation from this point of view, it's possible to speak of a war of the powerful against the weak. A life which would require greater acceptance, love, and care is considered useless, or held to be an intolerable burden, and is therefore rejected in one way or another. My wife, who runs a crisis pregnancy center in Port Royal, Virginia, where we're based, Human Life International, she has 7 nurses working for her, and she has a lot of stories to tell about the disrespect shown not only to the unborn child, but to women in general by these men who just use them. When they get pregnant, they say, get rid of that child or I'm leaving you, something like that. She just had a young lady who had a 22-week abortion because her husband was in jail, and of course she went and slept with another man. Her husband was getting out of jail, so that baby had to die. No sin piled upon sin. We see all kinds of things all the time in these crisis pregnancy centers. And at the other end of life, now we are hearing that in Canada, military veterans who have problems with their health or PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, when they call their version of 911, they're offered the choice of euthanasia. You're too much trouble, so let's just kill you and get you out of the way there. Very good for saving costs, because people near the end of life consume a lot of health care dollars. Now, the focus here is what the Holy Father is talking about, the focus of the entire encyclical. We're facing an enormous and dramatic clash between good and evil and death and life, the culture of death and the culture of life. We're not only faced with, but in the middle of this conflict, we're all involved and we all share it with the inescapable responsibility of choosing to be unconditionally pro-life. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to go out and pick an abortion clinics every day or become a pro-life leader or organize your own group. The most important work that pro-lifers can do is among their own families, the people they go to church with, the people they work with. Live the pro-life style of life, and then instruct other people when they need it. Talk to them about the value of human life, the dignity of human life. I'm sure that all of you here can think of many opportunities you may have had with that, and you'll certainly have more opportunities. So what you do is you learn the topic so you can talk to people about it, and then go out there and not only save the babies' lives, but you may very well save some souls while you're doing it. This is the heart of evangelization. What is the culture of death? There are 4 aspects of the human person. Mark 12:30. The physical, what you can see with your eyes. The mental, how you think. The heart, how you relate to other people, the emotional. And then there's the spiritual, or the soul. What the culture of death does is it completely neglects the spiritual. All we have is the body, the heart, and the mind. And so we don't have a spirit. The culture of death ranks people according to their physical characteristics, their usefulness to you, pornographers, abortionists, people who are slavers, euthanagists, racists, and diversity and inclusion and equity offices or DI offices. That's very, very, very interesting. We're all created in the spiritual image and likeness of God, which gives each of us an eternal soul, and that makes us all equal in His eyes. So the culture of death sees the human person entirely differently than we do. They look at the person, how can this person be of service to me? Of what use is this person? And if they're a bother to me, just get rid of them or go away from them, something like that. What is the culture of death? It sees human life as less than sacred and violent because it ignores and neglects the spiritual dimension of the human being. But the spiritual dimension, the deepest dimension, the most difficult to see dimension, is by far the most important. Our bodies can be degraded, our minds as well. Our emotional state, our heart may also be degraded. We might be tortured, we might be in a very bad marriage. But as long as we hold on to the holy faith, then we are a healthy person overall in the eyes of God. The culture of death, as we see, always chooses the easier wrong over the harder right. They see a problem, and what they do is they throw money at it, or say, let's do something that will paper over the problem and make us feel good. Or else virtue signaling. Let's go ahead, like in Portland, Oregon, where my wife and I used to live, before we moved to Virginia to work for HLI and Christ Expectancy Center 27 years ago. Portland, Oregon was called the Rose City. Beautiful city. And we love to walk in the downtown along the waterfront and on the bridges. You can't do that anymore because what they did is they made it possible for homeless people to come to Portland to get the benefits there. They passed out needles because we don't want these drug users to get all these diseases. And of course, what did that mean? People from all over the United States came to Portland, Oregon. And now it looks like Mogadishu. If you go down Portland to the main street there, all you'll see is boarded up shops from the riots there. You can't cross any of the many bridges across the Willamette River, which have wide sidewalks, because they're all occupied by homeless ticks. And the biggest part, my wife and I's favorite part, was Laurelhurst, 4 big city blocks, all verdant green, now completely destroyed, and taken over by thousands of drug addicts and homeless people. Instead of getting the people the help they need to get off these drugs, to get away from the life of crime, instead they welcome them and say, you can live anywhere you want. And it's destroyed the entire city. Does anybody here recognize this guy here? This cartoon character?
Mr. Magoo.
Mr. Magoo. In the 50s and 60s, there's a very funny cartoon about a man who couldn't see very well and all the misadventures he got into. That's the culture of death. The progressives' primary motivations are to feel good about themselves and show others how good they are. Virtue signaling, and the results are unimportant to him. Failure only leads to more of the same solutions and cause the problems in the first place. That's why they're shown so short-sighted. That's why they're pushing socialism. Most college students today have a favorable view of socialism, even though it murdered more than 120 million people in the 20th century. This is inexplicable unless you have these people being propagandized in our country's learning institutions. All they say is, well, we just have to do it a little differently. Or if I'm in charge and I oppose socialism, we'll have a paradise on earth. We had a paradise on earth one time, we screwed it up. We're definitely going to do it again if we try to get a paradise on earth. And what do you have to do? Kill 120 million people? What if somebody says, well, let's try Nazism. They just killed 6 million people. They made the trains run on time. What do people say? It'd be absolutely outrageous. The problem of evil, the next definition. This is what we're confronting. Evil. There are 3 types of evil. The physical evil includes sickness, injury, lack of education, and that which affects our bodies and our minds. Mental evil includes emotions which disturb the peace of the person and inflicts suffering, anxiety, guilt, and remorse. Moral evil, what we're most concerned with, defines simply as acting, speaking, or thinking in a manner contrary to the will of God. So these are the types of evil that in 60 Pills of the Catholic Catechism describes. This is great Archbishop Fulton says, it's hard for many to believe that there are not only bad men, but evil men. Bad men steal, rape, ravage, and plunder, but evil men are worse. They seek to destroy goodness, virtue, morality, decency, truth, and honor. Bad men who steal admit it, but evil men who do not steal call dishonesty honesty, totalitarianism democracy, slavery freedom. Evil men can be nice at table, polite with women, courteous in Washington, refined in London, and calm in Geneva. And we see that, don't we, with our politicians in the swamp, what we call Gomorrah on the Potomac or in Washington, D.C. These are very polite, very nice people. If you didn't know who they were, you would like to have them be your next door neighbor or a friend of yours. But they are very evil people because they have an objective to destroy anything that's pure, anything that's chaste, anything that's good in the world today. And that's why we have all this nonsense about transgenderism in the school. Fairfax School District, not too far from where we work in Front Royal, Virginia, has even had children go through gender reassignment surgery, they call it, without telling the parents. The parents don't have the right to know. That's not just bad, that's absolutely evil. Because these poor children are going to suffer the rest of their lives. Intrinsic evil, we're also very concerned with this term. The act can never be made good regardless of the amount of good that may come out of it. These acts include direct abortion and sterilization, contraception also, homosexual activity, blasphemy and sacrilege, ESCR, experimentation on the early human being, terrorism, slavery, and human trafficking. Intrinsically evil acts are wrong, regardless of the intent of the person doing them, the circumstances of the act, or the objective. Many people have difficulty in seeing certain acts as evil when a supposedly greater evil will be avoided. How about abortion for rape, incest, intent to save the life of the mother? They always talk about these cases. What if the baby's going to die soon after it's born? What if it's a product of rape or incest? What about the health of the mother? In reality, only about 2% abortions are done for these cases. What about the 98%? We need to start talking about that. Like my wife, a 22-week-old, fight with a 22-week-old baby. We've had that baby cut apart by the abortionist instruments because he didn't want to be embarrassed. Father Eichner was one of the previous HLI presidents who was picketing outside the abortion clinic. Saw a young girl going in, obviously pregnant, about 7 months pregnant, and he asked, well, why are you getting an abortion at this stage? And she said, well, we're having a school trip to Disneyland, and you can't ride the rides if you're pregnant, so I'm getting an abortion. A true story. Some acts that are generally considered evil may have extenuating or mitigating circumstances, such as ignorance or necessity. Examples might be killing in wartime, or as a last resort to protect yourself or your family against a violent aggressor. Another example is lying to protect another human being from grave harm or death. There's a story about World War II where an order of nuns were sheltering Jews and the Nazis came by and they respected the sisters and instead of ransacking the place, simply asked them, are you sheltering any Jews here? And they said, no, we're not, even though they were. And they felt very bad about this afterwards. But someone explained to them, the priest explained to them, that the Nazis did not have the right to know about Jews. By lying, technically, you saved their lives. That's not a sin, but a good example. Pope St. Pius said centuries ago, all the evils of the world are due to lukewarm Catholics. There are 62 million Catholics in this country, 23% of the population. Imagine what would have happened if on Roe v. Wade Day, January 22nd, 1973, whole church rose up and said, we will blockade every single abortion clinic with thousands of Catholics. Nobody will be able to get an abortion. And all the jails would fill up with Catholics until there was no place to put them all. They would have given up. And we don't have to do that ourselves, but we have to be able to be an example of others. And to be able to explain to people why the Catholic Church teaches as it does. Because a lot of people think that the Catholic Church is just trying to oppress women or punish women. They don't understand what it's really all about. It's up to you to explain it to them. Proportionalism. That's a big, long word for the simple concept. It means that it defines an act of good if its good effects outweigh the bad effects, and evil if its bad effects are greater than its good effects. The problem is, it's impossible to weigh the total good or bad that accrues to a particular act, because it has a ripple effect on everybody around you. A lot of people say that men should have no voice in abortion, except that we're speaking for it, of course, but they don't understand that men, families, society are affected by each abortion that happens. Proportionalism says that the natural law we live by is dynamic and changeable, just like the Constitution of the United States. One example is Father Charles Curran back in '68. He asserted the use of birth control pills is no more unnatural than the use of tranquilizers. You could say the use of lethal pills to kill people is no more unnatural than the use of tranquilizers. Many liberal Catholic theologians believe this is more faithful to the natural law of tradition, than the strict interpretation of the problems of the view are obvious. That's why the teaching of the Church holds firm, because if you start to make exceptions, you're lost. The devil is always tapping on the door. Tap, 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 tap. And you don't have to fling that door open to see who it is. All you have to do is open a little bit and look out and say, who's that? And he'll kick the door open. Keep that door shut and locked and don't let the devil in. Back in 1930, the Protestant churches in the Lambeth Conference, the Anglican Church in particular, said that we approved of contraception for only the most restrained of cases, the most difficult of cases. And back then, the Washington Post and the New York Times, which are extremely anti-life now, condemned this decision. The Washington Post said, to think that people can use contraception in a careful and restrained way is ludicrous, is the word they use. So, of course, those churches immediately moved on to contraception to be approved for any cases. Then we had the 62, 65, and 68 Supreme Court decision. Everybody can use contraception now. Then we moved on to abortion. And now we're knocking on the door for euthanasia. That's why the church holds firm. You can't let evil have even the tiniest bit of an open door, or it will knock that door open and it will defeat you.
If I may just for a second, what I was just saying, and I'm going to talk about this more, we're going to get into this, is can you put your slide back up for a moment, if you mind? I'm not going to answer it, because I want you to think. So Dr. Ryan showed two very different acts. So a tranquilizer and the use of the contraceptive pill. Now, what I want you to think about is what Charles Curran would say is that they're the same thing. There's nothing different between them, because what you're doing is you're regulating through medication, the fertility cycle of a woman. However, and he compares it to a tranquilizer, which anyone knows what a tranquilizer is. However, the actual birth control pill alters the very act of the conjugal act. It alters an act. The tranquilizer is going to alter an act. All right? So there are two very distinct things that these things represent. We'll talk about this more tomorrow, but I just want to kind of say right now, when you saw that, heard Dr. Ryan mention it, my goal would be is that you would have said, wait a minute, there's something wrong with that. See, I'm not sure what you thought about it when you heard it. So Charles Curran was a Catholic priest that was ousted for his immoral teaching at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. under the time of John Paul II. So he's a heretical teacher, still around, unfortunately, and still with some of his stuff. So I don't want to get too deep into this. I want to stop Dr. Brown from what he's doing. But to me, it's important for us to become sensitive to hear as we see that going, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's my goal. That's our goal. Okay? Tomorrow, I promise I'll come back to it. I promise. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Proportionalism, consequentialism, they deny objective truth. And that means we fall into situational ethics or subjectivity. Both subjectivity and consequentialism are promoted to having effectively rational reasons, but they're a mere philosophical cover for acting in accordance with how you feel in a particular situation. And that's the problem you'll see with the millennials. The older people are taught to think more rationally with facts. Millennials have been founded by the high schools, the grade schools, the universities to think with their feelings. What feels good? My wife at the CPC, Crisis Pregnancy Center, sees this every single day. Lives destroyed by doing what you think feels good, instead of following the natural law that's even in the church. So we have Catholics, we have Presbyterians, most people identify as Christian, even Muslims, Jews, and the nuns that Father talked about. Some of these lives that are so screwed up, it's going to take a lifetime to sort them out. Young ladies of 22 years old with 5 children by 5 different men, and they don't know how they got there. And they fall right into the same mistake again. It's not because they're evil or stupid, because their own mothers did exactly the same thing. And so now we're working on the 3rd generation. The teleological, that's another big word I can barely remember. Ethical theories are not faithful to the church's teaching, but they believe they can justify deliberate choices of kinds of behavior contrary to the commandments of the divine and natural law. These theories cannot claim to be grounded in the Catholic moral tradition. So, anything that feels good, you don't plan your life, you don't honor God with your feelings. God gave us a brain to think, to decide for Him. And rarely will you decide for Him if you're just acting on consequentialism or what feels good at the time. Another important one, implantation, fertilization, and conception. This is a very important one because, as usual, as I said before, the culture of death has changed the definition. When does a human life begin? And when does a human person begin? They're different questions. When does human life begin is a bit more complex than it may appear. And we have to be precise in our terminology and construct our definitions of what a human being really is. We also have to be able to explain it in an acceptable and understandable manner. So when did human life begin? What is human life? It could be us, or it could be a living cell that is separated from the body, the sperm and the egg sitting in a dish in preparation for IVF, or a living organ such as the heart or kidney awaiting transplantation. Now here's a handy tip for you if you have somebody at work who's stealing your lunch. On eBay, you can get a little box on it that says a big red cross for human organs for transplantation. If you keep your food in there, nobody's going to steal your lunch. So when did human life begin? It began when God created Adam and Eve and has existed continuously since that time. So human life began long ago. What we're really trying to answer here is when does the individual human person begin? There's a difference between human life and the human person. Fertilization is the joining of sperm and egg, each with 26 chromosomes, usually producing a tiny organism or zygote with 46 chromosomes. That's the only logical point at which a human person could begin. So if you ask the average college student, when does a human person begin? Or, in the incorrect, when does a human life begin? The young-born child will say, well, when the heart starts beating, completely arbitrary, or 20 weeks, or when it can survive outside the womb. If a feminist is talking to you, they might say, when I give permission for that baby to come into the world, that's when it becomes a human person. No, that. See, all of that's completely wrong. The logical point at which a human person will begin is when human cells, 23 plus 23 equals 46. From this point until natural death, there is a smooth and unbroken continuum of development, maturity, no other significant breakpoints that can logically be called the beginning of human life. Fertilization, the meeting of the sperm and the egg, is the beginning of a human person. There was human life before those two gametes, the sperm and the egg. The instant they join together, it's a human person. And if somebody tells you that's ridiculous, then you say, what alternative do you have? Whatever they come up with is going to be completely arbitrary. When does a human person begin? Most pro-lifers think that the human person begins at conception. But this plays into the hands of the pro-aborts who see this term as equivalent to implantation. So that's how they get away with saying, well, birth control pill is not abortifacient. They don't see the beginning of a human person as fertilization or the combining of the sperm and the egg. They see it a few days later when that new person is 6,428 cells embeds the lining of the uterus. And so both birth control pills, the IUDs, the ring, and all these other chemicals actually stop that baby from implanting part of the time, 1 to 2 times a year, and then they're simply gotten rid of by the woman's body. Human rights is another big one. Human rights.
I'll ring the bell.
Thanks, Bob. Make sure I have enough time to show the We hear a lot about human rights these days, and human rights is anything that the progressives say it is. You know, I have a human right to a free education. I have a human right to abortion. I have a human right to change my sex if I want, and all the rest of this nonsense. What is a human right? It's defined by the natural law as an inherent privilege or gain to every human, regardless of status, and does not violate the rights of others. True human rights include the right to life, freedom to practice your religion as you choose, to disobey and resist immoral laws, to be free from unjust discrimination. There are some types of discrimination that are just. For example, if you got somebody who's got 2120 vision, you don't want them to be piloting the airplane you're on. You have to have really good vision, uncorrected vision, in order to be an airline pilot. Or if you happen to be 4 feet 8 inches tall, you're not going to get too far applying to be a basketball player in the NBA. So there are some types of discrimination that are completely just. To self-defense, to legally immigrate, to criticize people in groups of power, although the Democrats would like to take that away from you. So the FBI raids Mar-a-Lago where Trump hangs out, and we're not allowed to say anything because that might cause violence. In other words, to shut your faces and don't object. To own private property, to privacy, clergy, penitent, physician, patient, attorney, client. There have been a few attempts around the world to try to get priests to break the seal of confessional, and so far they've all refused. To be free of slavery, human trafficking, and forced labor. To be free of being forced to participate in an economic system like socialism or communism that reduces the human person to their ability to produce. You should be allowed to choose your state in life and profession, married, single, or the religious state, to choose the children, the school your children attend, including schooling them at home, and to guide their education, which is something that the National Education Association would like to stand out. One of the more ridiculous lines is the NEA, National Education Association, for years claimed that children who are homeschooled have a substandard education, until people started saying, is that true? And why did 8 or 9 out of 10 of the top winners from the science award are they homeschoolers? Why did all 10 of the top spelling bee winners one year, they're all homeschoolers? Where are the public school graduates in all of this? Eventually they got the idea, they stopped being such hypocrites. To discontinue burdensome or painful medical procedures at the end of life. This is the talk in itself. The church does not teach that you have to squeeze every last minute of life in the A lot of people are ignorant and think that, and it's not true. If there's some, you have the right to oxygenation, you have the right to food and water, but even if these things become burdensome and cause more harm than good, you're allowed to discontinue them.
And what I would say is tomorrow, I'm going to talk about why these rights. So remember, we're talking about the Word of God, human person, and because we're dealing with the human person, we're dealing with rights that come from the very fact that they are a human person. So when you look at some of these, I hope that now you're asking, how does that relate to the human person? We'll try to talk about that tomorrow. And if we pull that slide back up maybe by tomorrow afternoon, I'm hoping you would say, oh, now that makes sense. I get that now. Why? But that's tomorrow. But we're just starting with some basic things to get you thinking and lay some groundwork.
Thanks, Rose. A baptized Catholic has the right to receive the sacraments if they're in a state of grace, some of them, and to receive the truth of the Word of God. We also have the right to be free of heresy being preached, free of distractions caused by endless illicit innovations in the liturgy. In other words, we have the right to have the truths of the faith preached to them. And you can see some real violation of these rights almost everywhere you go in the upper Midwest. There are some places like the Diocese of Arlington, which has a lot of locations which preaches the truth. The priests there are great. They will talk about contraception and pornography and immodest dress among both women and men. If people really thirst for the truth. Illegitimate rights violate the rights of God and of man. The Catechism tells us the natural law expresses the dignity of the human person and determines the basis for his fundamental rights and duties. There are many illegitimate human rights that are given to us by man, the force system of God. These include the right to have sex. We have actually people out there who say they should have the right to have sex. And there are some groups out there that I've documented and studied at some length. Well, if you have this particular right, if you claim a right, somebody else has an obligation to give you that right. And how are you going to swing that? The right to a child, so we have all of these illicit procedures to try to generate a child, and Pope Benedict talked about that extensively. The right to contraception, sterilization, abortion, reproductive rights. It's funny how you only have reproductive rights to have as few children as possible. If you have 3 or 4 children, they can criticize you. So people get reproductive rights only go one way. A right to pornography, to be free of criticism, especially the LGBT, whatever movement. A right to sex change mutilations, right to adultery, divorce, the right to die, to forced compliance for those who don't agree with you. The right to privacy extends to all of these, and the right to immigrate illegally. These are not human rights. But the culture of death activists spend as much time denying us our authentic rights as they do inventing counterfeits amongst themselves. Some examples: you don't have the right to refuse foreign abortions and sterilizations and distribute contraception. American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG, has said that you're not a good doctor if you don't provide the full range of health care, including sterilizations and abortion. And they're actually trying to pressure the certification authorities to deny medical licenses to doctors or medical students who refuse to assist in performing abortions. You don't have the right to distribute Christian literature or counter posters and pride parades. This is going on in Canada right now. There's one guy out there, his name is Wilcox, who's been in the court system for several years now just for passing out Christian literature at a pride parade. You don't have the right to have more than 2 children. And my wife and I have 7. Have had some very interesting debates with people who stop at 1 or 2. I like to tell the story as I came from a family of only 2 children. My wife came from a family of 10. And before we were married, we were discussing, how many children do you have? And I said, well, I think for the sake of the environment, we should only have 1 or 2. And she said, I think we should have 3 or 4, so we made a compromise and said, You don't have the right to picket or pray outside reproductive health centers. You know, they're allowed to come and picket. Crisis pregnancy centers were not allowed to picket their abortion clinics. You don't have the right to speak on college campuses. There have been hundreds of instances of conservative speakers going to colleges and being run out of town, physically assaulted, shouted down. It's completely ridiculous. You don't have the right to present alternatives to abortion with crisis pregnancy centers. Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, talking about how she'd like the government to shut down all the CPCs. Well, here you have the pro-abortionists telling us we don't do anything for the child after it's born, and yet they're trying to firebomb and shut down exactly the people who are doing that.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Isn't that funny? You don't have the right to opt your children out of explicit comprehensive sexuality education. And so we have plenty of cases where these people who are pushing this comprehensive sex ed on the kids are also pushing critical race theory, LGBT and all the rest of this nonsense, which is why 1.4 million children less in the public school system now than before the Kung Flu came by about 2.5 years ago. You don't have the right to refuse to participate in events honoring and celebrating homosexuality and transgenderism. A real problem in Canada. A lot of people have been fired from their jobs because they refuse to participate in these things. It used to be that the homosexuals and the transgenders said, we just want a place at the table. We just want to have a voice. But when the progressives or the culture of death gets a place at the table, they shut everybody else out. If you don't honor us, then you're a bad person. In summary, you don't have the right to do, say, or think anything that offends us. Much more fundamental rights are violated by these claims. All right, I'll finish up here with tolerance and then show that funny movie. Tolerance. All we want is tolerance. They're lying. Now, I spent a lot of time studying progressives before I realized there's a surefire way of telling them they're lying. And I read books on, poker players and how can you tell when somebody's lying. They look up and will laugh, or they put their finger on their lips or something like this and they're lying. But I finally figured out a surefire way to know when a progressive is lying. You watch their lips. And their lips are moving, they're lying.
I quoted Dr. Brian today with our director in Rome. We were talking about something going on in the church, and I said, same thing. I said, remember the wonderful line by Dr. Brian, if you want to know if the liberal or the progressive is lying, if their lips are moving, they're lying.
It's absolutely true. Okay, the last one, tolerance, is what we hear a lot. The willingness to endure something, in particular, the existence of opinions or behavior that one doesn't necessarily agree with. Now, tolerance, in most cases, can be a good thing. People are different. Sometimes people do things that annoy you. I know my wife does things that annoy me. She leaves a towel on the ground every darn time after she takes a shower. And instead of griping about it, just pick up the darn towel and put it over the laundry table and put kitchen towel. Maybe you'll get the idea. Those who follow the culture of death constantly talk about gaining tolerance for their lifestyle choices. This is not their final goal. John Gray said, when we tolerate a practice, a belief, or a character trait, we let something be that we judge to be undesirable, false, or inferior. Our toleration expresses a conviction that despite its badness, the object of toleration should be left alone. So first, again, they always go step by step. First, we want tolerance, right? But they know that tolerance means we still think that what you're doing is wrong. Near tolerance will never be sufficient for the culture of death. They'll still know that others are judging their deadly and immoral behavior to be evil and undesirable. They're looking beyond tolerance to acceptance and beyond that to celebration, enforced if necessary. Pope James St. John Paul II said, in the name of tolerance, an ever more powerful intolerance is spreading in public life. We're painfully aware of it. We notice an increasing tendency to marginalize us from the life of society. What is most sacred to them is mocked and ridiculed. These forms of recurring discrimination arouse great concern. It's interesting the psychology behind this. People who cling to their sins eventually start to identify with them and see them as an integral part of their identity. So I'm not a fireman who happens to be gay, I'm a gay fireman. So they don't comprehend the phrase, hate the sin above the sinner, because they believe that to attack the sin is to attack them person. So they become so melded to these sins, so committed to them, that that's an integral part of their personalities. Now we have people who believe themselves to be members of communities that practice or enable a particular sin, sodomy, transgenderism, euthanasia, abortion, even the polyamory, orgy or adultery communities, and the boy lover communities. There's also something I haven't looked up yet because I'm afraid it's called the fuzzy or the furry community. I really have to, I've never been drunk in my life, maybe I should get drunk before I look up that. The last couple of slides, this is the reformed gay activist Luke Montgomery, who went by the name Luke Sissyfag. He's one of the most obnoxious of the gay activists in the 90s, but he reformed. The motivation of the gay community is validation. They want to be approved. You have to say it's okay that you're gay, and if you disagree with one tiny, insignificant little point of their line cross sweeping agenda, you're a homophobe and a hate monger. You're a villain, a bad guy, and this is ludicrous. Last slide. Archbishop Shenan again. America, it is said, is suffering from intolerance. It is not. It's suffering from tolerance of right and wrong, truth and error, virtue and evil, Christ and chaos. Our country is not nearly so much overrun with the bigoted as it is overrun with the broad-minded. In the face of this broad-mindedness, what the world needs is more intolerance. Intolerance of evil. And this is why Pope St. Pius V said that all evil is due to lukewarm Catholics because we tolerate this stuff. We need to get out there and talk about it. All right?
Is just opening. But what I want you to think about is tonight is you have your first nightmare, and that is on this phrase. Because we're dealing with a human person who is made in the image and likeness of, and that each and every human person is owed respect because they're made in the image and likeness of God, without exception. Right? That's what we have to keep in the mindset. So when we're speaking about this tomorrow, and we look at, for example, a little boy that's there, just because he's this size doesn't mean we can disrespect him. Just because an elderly person has lost their cognitive ability doesn't mean they can be disrespected. Just because a person, is in the womb that we can't touch, we can't physically hold, doesn't mean we can disrespect. That respect is owed to every person, everywhere, every moment, every time. No exception to the rule. And even as we deal with moral dilemmas, which I'm hasten or cause their death. Right? And so people don't know how to answer questions. The moral dilemmas. That's what we're supposed to do. Alright? So, that's tomorrow. So, drink lots of coffee tomorrow morning. Come well prepared, well oiled. Alright? Well breathed. And just be prepared for some conversation. I think we're not meeting here, but we're meeting at the St. Lambert. Right? Okay, so that's tomorrow. So we'll come here, and then they'll, I guess I'll get out. No. The camera looking for you. Right? So tomorrow, we start at 9, and so we'll be very good. There's a lot more to go through, and so we're going to maximize that time as much as we can. Okay? So have a wonderful week. I'm going to turn it back over to Barbara and for the concluding parts. And before we leave, I will give you a lesson. So once before we all go bye-bye, and leave it all. Never turn down a priest's lesson. I brought that from a young boy. So Very important.
Wonderful information, really, that could improve the way we see and look at life, and of course the responsibility that we have, and a lot of education and re-educating people, and they started with our being missionary families of Christ. So uh, there's again so many things to learn tomorrow, and if you could really just bring the rest of your household. I know some of them are probably not available tonight, but this is the first time Father Shenan Boquet and Dr. Brian Close are here in Chicago. We don't know when's the next one yet. So we have the time to invite tomorrow, and of course on Sunday as well. So again, on Sunday we'll have a mass at 5 p.m. here in the chapel, and Father Bouquet will be the one celebrating. It's not really exclusively for us; anybody can join there. But the chapel is, we're given the chapel to celebrate the mass. So what I'm trying to say is that, if you wanna go to mass, that's fine. I mean, elsewhere, but maybe you can just come here early, and join us in the 5 p.m. mass on Sunday. Okay? So I think that's it. We have snacks prepared by Chicago chapter, and let's help also clean up. And I'll give Father again that final piece.
Give you a blessing. In the name of the Father, and